Welcome to Metro Boom's Disability Justice co-learning session. We're so happy you're here with us. So in the session today, you should be able to see closed captions. If they're not automatically on, there should be a CC button at the bottom of your screen, or it should be available under the More section, which is the three dots at the bottom of your screen. We have our wonderful interpreters with us here today from Keystone Interpreting Solutions, providing ASL interpretation. Thank you, Robin. And we have Mintic providing Spanish interpretation. Thank you so much, Sally. We'll have breakout rooms starting at around 6:45 to 7 p.m., hopefully, if we make everything on time. And we invite you to share any questions, access needs, and anything else you might need in the chat. I'm going to get us started with our land acknowledgement, land and labor acknowledgement. We are on the stolen homelands and treaty territory of the Dakota Oyate, Minnesota. The US government and European white colonizers carried out genocide, ethnic cleansing, and forced removal of the Dakota to acquire land and wealth. The Iowa, Ho-Chunk, Anishinaabe, and other indigenous nations have also called this region home. The waters and plants here have traditional, spiritual, and cultural significance to the indigenous peoples of this land, who are still here stewarding them. We acknowledge the violent exploitation, trafficking, and enslaved labor of Africans and their descendants by white colonizers on these same stolen lands. Deeply rooted white supremacy continues to propagate injustices in health, wealth, and opportunity. Here and across the country, Black communities are segregated and displaced, disrupting traditions and relationships with land. We benefit greatly from the undervalued and co-opted contributions of Black communities who have made possible much of our country's economic and cultural growth. Take a moment to reflect internally. How does white supremacy show up in your life? How might you be participating, and how can we come together to mobilize change? We have much to learn from Minnesota's Indigenous and Black communities about how we relate to each other and the earth. Jaden, I'll pass it to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jaden Ellington Vassar. I'm an environmental and social justice coordinator for Metro Blooms. And I just wanted to share some history about the disability justice and injustices within the United States. So, to say that the history of disability justice has always been fair and inclusive would just be untrue. In July of 1867, San Francisco approved Order Number 873, which restricted certain persons from appearing in streets or public places. That's meaning anyone with any type of physical disability would either be fined $25 in modern time, that would be around $460, jailed, or sent to a housing facility for the rest of their lives. A lot of people ask the question of where would it be and what cities would it be? A few cities like New Orleans, Portland, Oregon, Denver, Lincoln, Columbus, and New York were all places that followed under those same type of laws. And people in the United States grouped those laws together to call them the ugly laws. And the hatred didn't just stop at those types of laws that were restricting people from being out in public, but it also went how into like the medical system. So the medical, um, they did something it's called eugenics, which basically is like um, it's like medical racism, classism, basically a way to separate people from what they thought were like ideal people in the United States. Something they did specifically in Minnesota was sterilize people that had any of those physical disabilities so they would never be able to have kids to fit that type of um, basically just taking people out of society and making them feel less than. And that specifically was geared towards women. So they found women, grabbed them, and they couldn't have kids. These laws were all over the United States. And some of them went on, a lot of them went on for 100 years. The last ugly law that was, reported to be like to cease and exist was in 1974, which in reality was not that long ago. Because before then, the United States and these different cities were very strong on keeping these laws in place and taking people from their homes, from society, and, taking people away, which was terrible. And a lot of people don't know about it, which really makes our work go even harder because of the amount of time that people were oppressed and seen as less than. So now, having this knowledge, we are wanting to create a better world for everyone. And then on the screen, this is a newspaper article from about 10 years after San Francisco passed the of order 873. Basically, a news reporter reporting, like, yep, this is what we're doing, and very casual as if it was normal. And back in that time, they felt like it was normal. All knowing now and even knowing then, it's not normal and it's awful to people.
Thank you, Jaden. Okay. So, the social model of disability, I'm going to read the quote. Essentially, the social model says that individual limitations are not the cause of disability. Rather, it is society's failure to provide appropriate services and adequately ensure that the needs of disabled people are taken into account in societal organization. So the social model recognizes that disability is produced by systems and structures that can be changed. Rather than making it an individual issue, this model frames disability as a structural issue rooted in social expectations and conditioning. Disability justice, as a framework, helps us link the social model to systems of oppression. We can get really clear about the fact that white supremacy and capitalism have produced and perpetuated systems and structures that deny disabled people access to care, resources, and dignity. Under ongoing colonialism, we have all been conditioned to forget each other's needs to thrive, and we have been conditioned to not take care of each other. The ways that disabled folks are systematically discriminated against is a core function of how white supremacy and capitalism function. Colonialism believes that people are unequal and organizes people to serve production for wealth for those at the top. In this slide, the author is making a connection between the foundations of colonialism and the discrimination against disabled people. They say the violent racism and classism of the original sins of America's colonialism and slavery were both premised on the idea that non-white people were not equal in ability to Europeans. The suffering and exploitation of non-white peoples that built the United States was allegedly justified by the assumption that these subordinate classes lacked some crucial capacity or were, in a sense, disabled. And this is why this author, Nellie Basili, says there is no accessible version of a settler colonial state. There is no liberatory version of a war economy. Mia Mingus is one of the foundational activists who created the framework of disability justice. In the next quote, she reminds us that the goal of disability justice is not just inclusion within a violent system. We must aim to dismantle the very system that creates barriers to access. We need to think of access, so in the quote she says, we need to think of access with an understanding of disability justice, moving away from an equality-based model of sameness, and we are just like you, to a model of disability that embraces difference, confronts privilege, and challenges what is considered normal on every front. We don't simply want to join the ranks of the privileged, we want to dismantle those ranks and the systems that maintain them. So now we know that everything is connected. Disability justice and environmental justice, as we know, are naming the same systems as the root problems. So in this quote, we get really clear about the relationship between disability justice and environmental justice. Of the estimated 1.3 billion people living with disabilities globally, 80% live in low and middle income countries where the effects of climate change are usually most severe. Because identities intersect, disabled people who are also BIPOC or LGBTQIA+ may face heightened risk of living in communities plagued by environmental injustice, where limited access to resources and exposure to contamination and pollution compound existing barriers. These conditions contribute to higher rates of disability and deepen inequality. They also highlight the importance of mutual aid networks, which become essential when formal response systems are inaccessible or under-resourced. Community-led support enables disabled people to share information, check in on one another, and stay connected during emergencies. This quote is referring to a global perspective, but even if we just wanted to focus on the land that most of us currently share, we know that these environmental injustices are often concentrated within communities of color. And so this quote is really showing us how these effects compound on each other. Okay. And so here is our very simple framework. White supremacy and capitalism disrupt community and ecological resilience, and they fracture relationships between people and the land. And this is what creates injustices against our environment, against our bodies, and against disabled people. Megan, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Gaia. I invite everybody to just take a breath. Notice where you are in time and space. Jaden and Gaia just shared a lot of information with us all, and you might be feeling different things. Um, you might be reflecting on your own personal experiences in relation to this information. And we wanted to take the next few minutes to reflect with each other and do some sharing. So, for the next, I believe, 15 minutes or so, we're going to go into breakout groups on Zoom. And you can go ahead and introduce yourselves to each other and then think about one, one, two, or three reflections that are really sticking with you from either from the presentation or your own personal experience as it relates to disability justice, your experience moving through the world and your identity. And then think about if you have one question on your minds after these past few minutes.
The next slide, uh-oh, the next slide is a little bit more kind of tangible stuff. So our team, the community relations team, thinks about access a lot. And, access for people with disabilities, access related to economics, access, just all the ways that we can make connection to the earth more accessible. And so we came up with some accessible gardening, like affordable, accessible gardening suggestions. So firstly, everyone deserves a safe and comfortable garden to work in. Some of the things and yeah, try to listen to your body, I guess is a good place to start. Obviously, everyone's gonna have different needs in a garden space and be able to use different tools or options to meet those needs. Some basics, you know, wear shoes, sunscreen, stay hydrated, take breaks, have shade if you can. Some of the other strategies are plant simply. So if you can, start smaller, that's always a good strategy. Planting densely is helpful because it reduces the amount of weeds that might pop up. Using edging does the same. If you plant perennials, that means you don't have to replant the whole garden every year. Using container gardens to bring the garden up to a height that might be more accessible for you. You can see in the photo, they just use old milk crates here. There's lots of creative ways to build up container beds. You can modify tools also with pool noodles. You can cut and add those to handles to make them have a larger gripping surface. On the right side is a little illustration. You can use PVC pipe and a funnel to put your seeds down in a garden bed if bending over to drop the seeds isn't possible. Ask Jan is a good website to look for adaptive tools based on your needs. Let's see, one other tip is using soaker hoses. So you can take an old hose and poke holes in it yourself or buy a soaker hose system. And then you lay it in your garden and turn the water on and off rather than having to hold up a hose. And then maybe gardening isn't accessible for you. There's still meaningful ways to connect to the earth. I just recently found out I can't be in the dirt for the next like 2.5 years, which is, yeah, it's really sad. But I'm gonna find ways to still connect. So I'm going to make labels for our gardens where I'm learning the names of the plants that we're planting and sharing that knowledge with other people. I'm going to hang out with people while they plant and get to know them and learn what they learn or what they know about the earth, and find other ways to engage that still allow me, yeah, to continue to deepen my relationship. I think that was me. I'll pass on to the next.
Thank you, Erin. Hi, everybody. My name is Megan. I use she or they pronouns, and I am on the education team at Metro Blooms. I work on our communication, so things like our email newsletters and social media. And I also help with the Moms to Legumes program, which helps people across Minnesota create pollinator habitat through grants and educational resources. So, one thing that might surprise people about Moms to Legumes is that even though the program is about gardens, there's also a lot of technology involved, online forums, webinars, accessing resources on our website. And because of that, I spend a lot of time thinking about digital accessibility, how we can make our online tools and information easy for everyone to use, and how we can provide accommodations so that all people can fully participate. And from my perspective, accessibility is something that benefits everybody, whether or not you identify as disabled. We all benefit from information that's easy to understand and instructions that are clear to follow. Um, One reflection that my breakout room had is that all of us are going to be disabled or affected by disability in our lives, whether that's a short-term injury or aging. And um, technology is one of those things that changes quickly, and we're all trying to understand it and coming from different experiences. So I often am working one-on-one with our participants whenever needed and troubleshooting alternative ways we can have them submit information, or have an interpretation, or often it's simply like walking through something together, talking through something together. And when it comes to communications, it's important to me that we are sharing things that are clear. In our work, we talk about rain gardens and native plants. And in that world, there can be a lot of technical terms, and we don't need to use those technical words to get the same thing across. There's almost always a way to explain in plain language, and we want everybody to feel welcome in this work and confident that they can participate and ask questions no matter where they're starting from. And for me, and I think my coworkers would say the same, accessibility is an ongoing learning process. We're always learning from the people that we work with and adapting. Um, and so if you notice something in our programs or in our communications that doesn't feel accessible in some way, please let us know. We want to hear your feedback. We want to do better. And then lastly, I just want to build on what Erin shared about workplace culture and just acknowledge that Metro Blooms really values the well-being of our staff, and I feel like that's very much related to accessibility and disability justice. We believe people do their best work when they have the support they need rather than feeling like they have to push through. So something that all our staff does is regularly check in about our capacity and work together to find ways we can support each other and share our workload and move away from the idea that being constantly busy or being overwhelmed is something to celebrate because it's not. Our well-being comes first. Um, and then also recognizing that every person's voice matters too is something that I notice at Metro Blooms, and that we respect the different ways people communicate and share ideas, um, no matter how they're expressing themselves or regardless of their role. These different perspectives make our work stronger and help us kind of build a more inclusive workplace. That's all from me, and I think I'm passing it to Michaela next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela, and I am also on the education team. I manage our sustainable land care training and our career readiness cohorts. Our sustainable land care training is a paid training program for young adults, 17 to 24, from green zones in North and South Minneapolis. At the training, they are introduced to the benefits of green infrastructure through an environmental justice lens. So a big piece of my role in managing the training programs is also facilitating as well as program development. Um, so a constant area of growth for the training is thinking about how we can be creative with supporting and encouraging engagement in learning. Recently, this is my second year going through the trainings. I have had thoughts and hopes of incorporating movement, art, and creative expression into the learning, designing and keeping in mind how our content and the overall training experience can be available for all different ways we learn and are able to engage with our environment that is around us. Um, like mentioned, funding is always kind of on the forefront as we think about ways to grow our program and ensure that it is a safe, inclusive, and accessible training experience. So funding support would allow for us to have, more staffing capacity to um, think creatively about how we want to develop our program and ensure that it is meeting the needs and the wants of those participating in our training. Um, it can also support multiple ways that we engage with our curriculum, whether that's updating it, um, making sure that, it is relevant to the trainees, to the times, and things like that, as well as being able to adapt and develop content that is more accessible, just ensuring that our training locations are accessible and safe. Um, Making any changes, to any issues that could arise where we realize, oh, maybe this approach isn't as helpful as we maybe would have hoped. Things like that. Um, Another kind of way to connect this to disability justice and things like that is being able to like have opportunities for staff development and learning. Last year I attended the Collective Sum, which I believe was organized by the Minnesota Black Minnesota Foundation or something like that. Apologize. I don't remember off the top of my head, but this was just a really supportive experience as an attendee, and a great learning experience as well. I felt seen and heard amongst all the folks that attended without even having to speak. It is really important to have experiences like the conference that I attended because it helps me process, you know, the work that I do, how I can also show up better for the folks that I work with and engage with, as well as like feeling refreshed and inspired to continue building on this program and, our mission and vision for our work. Um, this type of learning opportunity also allowed me to see how others facilitate spaces and see how other facilitators ensure everyone is comfortable to participate, whether it is specific language used, how they organize the space, and activities they encourage us to engage in. Uh, these type of opportunities I take a lot. I take away a lot. I take a lot away from them just because it's so interesting to just see how other folks choose to facilitate the space that they are leading the learning in. So with these opportunities, I think it allows us to provide inspiration to intentionally create, maintain, and strive to ensure our trainees' experience is as inclusive and accessible as possible. So that is all I have.
Thank you. Okay, so real quick, some next steps. I want to shout out, I think Barak is still here, but through my work with Barak in Rosie Sima's dance, I learned about how important it is to include access as like an administrative operational budget item. So that is a next step we're exploring for Metro Blooms. Increasing access, as Michaela said, in our workforce development program, and incorporating a heat policy to continue this trend of a strong workplace culture that, where we take care of each other. Oh, and heat policy was implemented as of today. Hooray. Congratulations to all. Okay, I believe we are at 7:30, so if you must leave, thank you so much for being here. I'll show you the thank you slide before you leave. Just, a big thank you to you for joining us, to all the current and past and future disabled, specifically Black and Brown disabled, trans disabled, activists and advocates who have made this world a place where we can all be people. We're so honored to learn together. So thank you so much for being here. If you can stick around for a couple of minutes and you want to share, what do you hope to see from Metro Blooms that furthers disability justice and access in our work? We are dreaming big and would love to hear from your wisdom. So if you would like to leave us a little note in the chat or just, unmute, feel free to share. Or even if you just want to say thank you before you leave, it would be nice to hear voices. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Michaela. Thank you. I'll read out Julie's comment from the chat. I love hearing about a cohesive and supportive work environment. It is so important and just not heard of anymore. The push in our world now is work harder, faster. Thanks, Julie. Laura says, Nora in our breakout session shared a desire to see more accessibility for emotional and mental accessibility, not just physical. Julie says connection to mentors or groups in the areas would be great. Yeah. Network Weaver says thank you. Would love to talk about what it means to have a fragrance-free workplace. If anyone is up for it, yeah. Cindy says thank you. Becca says thank you, Metro Blooms. You're a beacon in the Twin Cities and so great to point to as an example of how workplaces are organized and organizations can prioritize disability justice and all types of justice. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Barak says, thank you all. As a wheelchair user, I'm curious about accessible garden spaces in the Twin Cities. Are there wheelchair accessible gardens that I can contribute to the deepening of gardening practices? Erin is nodding. I don't know if that means you know of some.
I will look into it and can provide some uh information. I will do that
Yeah,
soon.
yeah.
And
We'll
Gaia,
send
can you
up
help?
a
Okay,
yeah, we'll
great.
send a follow-up email with some answers to these questions. And Becca's already responded. The garden beds at Sioux Line Community Garden are all raised. Could be worth looking into. Caitlin says, I would love to know city representatives who are doing this work. It would be great to keep them in office so they can continue doing this work. Kat says, would love to see this space continue on a regular basis where folks can come together and help Metro Blooms create fully accessible nature spaces. Beautiful. Barak says, appreciate it and take care. And with that, I believe I shall release us all into the night. Thank you so much for being here. Take care and hope to see you soon.